My name is Natalie Brooks, and I'm 32 years old. I live in Austin, Texas, with my 6-year-old son, Liam. From the outside, my life might have looked simple, maybe even happy. I worked as a dental assistant at a clinic just off South Congress Avenue. Liam was in first grade at a nearby elementary school, and most days I picked him up after my shift ended. We'd head home, make mac and cheese together, and he'd sit cross-legged on the carpet watching cartoons while I folded laundry in the background. Let me know where in the world you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you're ready to see how I turned betrayal into strength and silence into freedom. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Our tiny world, held together by bedtime stories, after-school hugs, and goodnight kisses that smelled faintly of chocolate milk and shampoo. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And that, to me, was everything. What people didn't see was the weight I carried behind my eyes. Because being a single mom wasn't something I planned, it was something I had to become. Liam's father, Drew, left when I was still in the hospital recovering from the emergency C-section, said he wasn't cut out for this, and vanished like a shadow at sunrise. I stopped trying to reach him after the second year. Liam never asked for him, and I stopped feeling like I owed anyone an explanation. What made it harder wasn't the silence Drew left behind. It was the noise that came from my own mother, Carol. My mother had always been difficult, image-obsessed, calculated, cold in a way that wasn't always easy to spot until it hit you like a brick to the chest. She cared about perception more than people, about how things looked, not how they felt. And even though I kept trying to believe she might change, she never did. When I found out I was pregnant, she didn't ask how I was feeling. She asked what people would think. When Liam was born, she didn't hold him and cry like I dreamed she might. She criticized the blanket I wrapped him in, said it was too plain for photos. And every birthday after that felt more like a photo shoot than a celebration. She planned the parties down to the minute, posed Liam for pictures, and spent more time arranging balloons than talking to her own grandson. But I let it happen, year after year, because a part of me still wanted her to care, to be the grandmother Liam deserved, to finally see me, not the failure she whispered about at dinner parties, but me, Natalie, her daughter. Liam's 7th birthday was coming up in 2 weeks, and my mom was already knee-deep in planning. She insisted on a pirate-themed party at some overpriced venue with an animatronic parrot and gold coins scattered everywhere. I tried to gently suggest something simpler, something more Liam, but she bulldozed through my words, as usual. I already paid the deposit, Natalie. It'll be spectacular. No one wants your sad little backyard party. I didn't respond. I just stared at her across the brunch table at La Madeleine and nodded slowly while sipping cold coffee. Liam was coloring in a menu next to me, oblivious. I didn't know then that none of it would matter. The day that changed everything started like any other. It was a Friday. I dropped Liam off at school and headed to work, where I had back-to-back cleanings and one emergency root canal on a tourist who had bit down on a rock-hard tortilla chip. Around 2:30 p.m., my phone buzzed in my pocket between appointments. I saw the name Travis Elementary flash on the screen, and my heart dropped before I even answered. Ms. Brooks? This is Nurse Emily from Liam's school. He collapsed during recess. We've called 911. He's being taken to Dell Children's. I didn't even hang up before grabbing my bag and running out the door. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and prayer. I kept whispering his name between gasps of breath, my hands trembling on the wheel. By the time I arrived at the emergency room, Liam was already being wheeled inside. His face was pale. His lips were blue. We think it may be a severe asthma attack, the nurse told me gently, guiding me toward the pediatric trauma unit. Has he had attacks before? He's had mild ones, I said, choking on my words, but never like this. They placed a mask over his face, hooked up wires, started an IV. I held his tiny hand and felt the weight of every mistake I'd ever made press into my chest like a boulder. I begged whatever force was listening not to take him from me. I must have sat there for hours, frozen, praying, watching machines beep, until finally the doctor emerged with cautious relief in his voice. He's stable. We've given him a strong bronchodilator. He's sleeping now. I collapsed into a chair and cried silently, the kind of tears that rack your soul. And then, my phone buzzed. Where are you? The cake vendor needs confirmation on flavor. I'm thinking chocolate with raspberry filling. Also, should we order the balloon arch in silver or gold? It was my mother. I stared at the screen, unbelieving. I had texted her earlier in a panic when we arrived at the ER. I told her Liam was fighting to breathe. I told her he was unconscious. She didn't ask how he was. Not once. Instead, she was worried about balloons. I blinked away the rage, rereading the message again as if maybe I'd misunderstood. But no, it was clear, crystal clear. My son could have died, and all she cared about was the cake. I didn't reply. I couldn't. The silence inside me roared louder than any scream. Later that night, I sat by Liam's bed and watched him sleep. His chest rose and fell beneath a thin hospital blanket, each breath a little stronger than the last. I wanted to shield him from everything, from the pain, from the noise, from the people who were supposed to love him but didn't know how. And somewhere deep inside me, something shifted. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was fury. Cold, calculated fury. Not the kind that makes you yell or cry, but the kind that makes you act, that makes you finally decide. My mother had never truly seen me, and now she had shown she didn't see Liam either. But I would make her see, not through words, not through begging, through something else. Something she'd never expect. Something she'd never forget. My shift at the hospital ended 3 days later. I'd barely left Liam's side, only stepping away to shower and bring him the soft snacks he liked once he started to eat again. Every time I looked at him, curled up with his favorite blanket and a new dinosaur coloring book from one of the nurses, the weight of what almost happened crushed me all over again. He had brushed too close to something I couldn't fight, and the terror of losing him was something I'd never felt with such intensity. The moment we got home, everything around me looked smaller. The apartment seemed dimmer. I moved slower, like the world had shifted in some invisible way. What didn't shift, though, was my mother. She didn't show up at the hospital. Not once. Not even when I called and told her Liam was recovering. She didn't ask if we needed anything. No visit, no flowers, no warm meal, just more texts about the birthday party she still insisted on hosting, as if nothing had happened. She even sent me a screenshot of the finalized guest list, complete with her country club friends and a few moms from her church group, none of whom Liam had ever met. That's when I realized something brutal. She wasn't planning this party for Liam. She was planning it for herself, her image, her narrative. In her version of the story, she was the proud grandmother throwing a luxurious event for her sweet little grandson. Never mind that he had just been in the ICU. Never mind that he was scared, recovering, and still too weak to climb stairs without gasping. She didn't care. And I was done. The next morning, I called her. Not to argue, not to beg. I just needed to say one thing. The party is off. There was a pause on the other end. Then her voice snapped back, sharper than a whip. Excuse me? You heard me, I said, steady. Liam doesn't want a party. He wants to rest. We'll celebrate quietly at home, just the two of us. You don't get to make that decision without me, she hissed. Do you know how much time and money I've spent? Do you even care what people will think? That last line. It was always about what people would think. Not what Liam would feel. Not what I needed. I care about my son, I said. That's all. I hung up before she could say more. She didn't call back. But 3 days later, a courier showed up at my door with a giant box. Inside, a full pirate costume, Liam's size. A note tucked into the collar in her looping cursive. He'll look adorable in this for the party. Don't ruin it with your drama. I folded the costume neatly and placed it in a donation bag. That night, as I sat beside Liam watching a cartoon he barely chuckled at, I saw how tired he still looked, how fragile. And that quiet anger inside me, no longer just pain, started to form into something with edges. I began planning something of my own. Not a party, not a confrontation. Something quieter, more permanent. My mother's weakness was her need for attention. Everything she did was curated for show. Every charity event, every social media post, every coffee meeting with her ladies' circle, all of it was about admiration. Her status was built on the illusion that she was the perfect mother, the ideal grandmother, the elegant matriarch with a beautiful family she had nurtured into success. But I knew the truth, and I wasn't the only one. There were stories. People who had whispered to me over the years at her events, in kitchen corners, during brief encounters in supermarket aisles. Some of her former friends. Even my old ballet teacher who once admitted to me that my mom had publicly humiliated a fellow parent at a recital for wearing flats instead of heels. My mother's image was fragile, and I had something she could never manipulate: her own words. She had a habit of texting carelessly. Her phone was her confessional, where she ranted, gossiped, and bragged. I had years of messages saved: cruel jabs, dismissive comments about me, insults about other parents, even voice notes complaining about how exhausting it was to pretend she loved being a grandma. I created a document. I compiled screenshots, dated and labeled, with a short introduction about my experience as her daughter. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't insult her. I told the truth, the raw, unfiltered truth. Then I created an email list. I didn't blast it to the world. Just enough to hurt. Her book club, her charity board, her social circle, the school mom she desperately tried to impress. I didn't sign my name. I used a pseudonym and sent it from a clean, anonymous account. It simply read, "Before you trust the story she tells you, read the one she lived." I hit send on a Thursday afternoon while Liam was napping beside me on the couch. The silence was immediate, but by Saturday morning the cracks started showing. She called me 8 times. I didn't answer. Then came the emails, each more frantic than the last. "What have you done? This is slander. You're ruining my life. You ungrateful little girl." Still, I said nothing. Then the silence returned, which, from my mother, was more telling than any scream. The following week, a friend of hers, Angela, a woman I actually liked, bumped into me at the grocery store. She didn't look away. She didn't act cold. She walked up to me and hugged me. "You were brave to tell the truth," she whispered in my ear. "Some of us always suspected, but we didn't know how bad it was. I'm sorry." That moment was the first time I felt free. Not victorious, not proud, just free. At home, Liam was healing, slowly but surely. His color had returned. He was laughing again, chasing his stuffed animals across the carpet. I made him a small cake, his favorite, vanilla with strawberry frosting. We didn't need balloons. We didn't need costumes. Just us. He wore pajamas and blew out 7 candles with a giggle. After he went to bed, I stood in the doorway of his room and watched him breathe, steady and safe. I thought of my mother and her silence, of all the years I tried to earn her love, when it had never really existed to begin with. What I did wasn't out of hatred. It was out of self-preservation. I had protected my son in the only way I knew how, by finally ending the performance. And though the curtain had fallen on her show, my life had just begun. 2 weeks passed without a single word from my mother. Not a text, not a call, not even the dramatic emails she used to send in the middle of the night when she felt slighted by someone. Her silence used to make me anxious, used to leave me wondering what kind of punishment would follow. But this time, it was different. This time, her silence meant something else entirely. It meant I'd finally taken back the narrative. I had finally done what she feared most. I told the truth. I knew she must be spinning behind closed doors. My sources, subtle as they were, fed me tidbits without me having to ask. Her charity board had asked her to take a leave of absence. A few of the school mothers had pulled out of her birthday committee. Her Instagram, once carefully curated and updated almost daily with floral arrangements and mimosa brunches, had gone dark. Her mask had cracked, and she was scrambling behind the curtain, desperately trying to tape it back together. And yet, I felt no joy in it, no victory, just the hollow relief that comes after surviving a storm. You don't celebrate that the tornado tore the house down. You just thank God you're still breathing. It was around that time that something changed with Liam, too. He began asking questions. Why didn't Grandma come to the hospital? Why didn't she come to my birthday? I never wanted to lie to him, but I also didn't want to turn his innocence into bitterness. So I told him the truth, the version he could handle. Grandma was busy, baby. Sometimes people don't show up the way we want them to, but that has nothing to do with you. He accepted that answer in the way children often do, with a soft nod, a blink, and then a new topic, as if his little heart knew it wasn't worth carrying. But I saw it. The seed had been planted. And one day, he'd understand. Then came the voicemail. It was a Monday. I was folding laundry, rerunning Paw Patrol in the background, when my phone buzzed. A number I knew all too well. I didn't answer. But after the beep, she spoke. Her voice was shaking, yet familiar. The kind of voice that used to order me around at 7 years old like I was a tiny assistant in her empire. Natalie, I don't know what you think you've accomplished. You've turned people against me. You've embarrassed this family. But I'm still your mother. And one day, Liam is going to know what you did. You think you're protecting him, but you're filling his life with resentment. One day, he'll look at you the way I look at mine. Click. I stood there, unmoving. Her words slithered through the air like smoke, designed to choke, not to illuminate. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to defend myself. I didn't feel guilt or confusion. I felt clarity. She was never going to change. What she said about Liam, about him resenting me, it wasn't just cruel. It was projection. She resented me because I became everything she couldn't. I protected my child. I chose love over image, reality over illusion. And that, in her world, was the ultimate betrayal. I saved that voicemail. I didn't know why. Maybe as a reminder. Maybe as a warning. 3 days later, I got a call from Child Protective Services. I froze. The woman on the line was kind, gentle even, but direct. Ms. Brooks, we received a report alleging medical neglect regarding your son, Liam. We are required to follow up on all reports. We'd like to schedule a home visit. My blood ran cold. What kind of report? I'm not at liberty to disclose the source, she said softly. But the report claims you delayed seeking treatment during a medical emergency. I almost dropped the phone. There was only one person cruel enough, calculating enough, to weaponize my love for Liam like this. My mother. I scheduled the visit. I spent the next 2 days cleaning every inch of our apartment, organizing medical records, printing every document from the hospital, compiling school reports, and even gathering notes from the pediatrician. Liam had no idea. I told him a friend was coming to visit. I didn't want to scare him. When the caseworker arrived, she was warm and understanding. She walked through the apartment, complimented Liam's drawings on the fridge, asked gentle questions, and reviewed the medical documents I had prepared. At the end of it, she smiled kindly and said, "You're clearly a devoted mother, Ms. Brooks. I see no reason for concern. I'll be closing the case." I nodded, holding back tears. But once the door closed behind her, I collapsed. This wasn't just petty anymore. This was war. She had tried to take the only thing in the world that mattered to me, and she'd done it with a calculated cruelty that made my blood turn to ice. This wasn't the behavior of a disappointed mother. This was revenge, and I wasn't going to wait around to see what she tried next. I contacted a lawyer, a friend from high school, now specializing in family law, agreed to meet me. I told her everything, showed her the messages, the voicemail, the CPS report. She didn't even blink. "She's trying to establish a paper trail," she said, "trying to paint you as unstable or neglectful. It's textbook behavior in grandparent custody interference cases. You need to protect yourself legally." The thought terrified me. "You think she'd try to take Liam from me?" She looked me dead in the eye. "I've seen less determined people do worse." We filed a preemptive cease and desist. We drafted a custody protection letter and placed a restraining request on file, just in case. I changed Liam's school pickup permissions. I blocked her number, her email, even her social media. I told his teachers not to release him to anyone but me or one of 2 trusted friends. It was exhausting, and it broke my heart, but it was necessary. What she didn't know, though, was that I had one final card to play. I began documenting everything, not just for legal protection, but for something bigger, for a record, for truth. I created a private blog, password protected, anonymous. I wrote everything. From my childhood memories of her cold indifference to her obsession with reputation. From Liam's birth to the day she reported me to CPS. I didn't write it to destroy her. I wrote it to liberate myself. Each post was a release, a crack in the glass of her manufactured story. I never named her. I never needed to. Anyone who knew us would understand. And the blog spread. Quietly. Organically. One day, an old friend messaged me out of the blue. "Hey, are you the one behind Unspoken Daughter?" I paused, then replied, "Why?" "Because it's the most painfully beautiful thing I've ever read. I cried, twice, and I think it's helping people." That was the turning point. Not when I published, not when I filed legal papers, but when I realized I was no longer surviving her abuse, I was dismantling it. Spring arrived in Austin with its usual blend of heat and wildflowers, the air sweet with blooming bluebonnets and early morning dew. Life outside seemed to be moving forward. Children riding scooters down sidewalks, neighbors tending to gardens, restaurants filling again on weekends. But inside my apartment, I was rebuilding something far less visible: myself. The weeks following my mother's retaliation through CPS had left scars I didn't fully understand until I caught myself checking over my shoulder at school pickups or keeping the door chain locked even during the day. Liam, thankfully, remained untouched by the storm. He was too young to see the undercurrents that pulsed beneath the surface. His world was still crayons and juice boxes and afternoon cartoons. But I knew how easily that peace could be shattered, and that awareness made me more determined than ever to fortify our lives against any future attacks. Therapy became part of that process. I reached out to a counselor named Ellen who specialized in toxic family dynamics. Sitting in that quiet room every Tuesday afternoon, with the smell of lavender and the gentle hum of a white noise machine, I began untying knots that had lived in me for decades. Ellen didn't rush me. She never interrupted. She let me unpack everything: my mother's conditional love, her perfectionism, the way she used shame like a scalpel. "You learned to measure your worth by her approval," Ellen said during our third session. But what if her approval was never meant to be attainable? That sentence stayed with me for days. What if I had spent my entire life trying to earn something that was never real? What if my mother's love was a mirror made of smoke, always shifting, always out of reach? The realization hurt, but it also set me free. I stopped trying to be the version of Natalie she wanted. I started discovering the version of Natalie I actually was. I began doing small things just for me. I signed up for a pottery class at a studio downtown, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. My hands, once always tense and tired, found comfort in the rhythm of shaping clay. I started writing again. Not just blog entries, but poems, short stories, even a few chapters of a novel I'd abandoned years ago. Liam and I began a weekend ritual of Pancake Saturdays, where we wore mismatched pajamas and danced to old 90s songs in the kitchen. It wasn't grand, but it was healing. The blog, meanwhile, took on a life of its own. Unspoken Daughter had gained a quiet following, mostly women, though not exclusively. Strangers began to reach out, sharing their own stories of mothers who belittled them, families who abandoned them, relatives who turned love into currency. Some messages were brief, others were pages long, but all of them had the same undercurrent: relief. Relief that they weren't alone. And as I read those words, I realized neither was I. Liam noticed the changes too. One evening, as we were cleaning up Legos together, he looked up and said, "You smile more now." I paused. "I do?" "Yeah," he said, handing me a red block. "It's nice. I like it when you smile." I hugged him so tight he squirmed and giggled. But not everything was perfect. The silence from my mother had morphed into a slow burn. She was careful now. No more voicemails. No texts. But mutual acquaintances would still mention her name in passing, usually with tight smiles and uncomfortable glances. I knew she hadn't forgotten. I knew she was waiting. For what, I wasn't sure. Then one evening, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. "Natalie, I won't apologize because I don't believe I did anything wrong. You've always been overly emotional, always looking for something to blame. If I pushed you, it was to make you stronger. You don't understand what it means to be a woman in this world. You think love is soft and sweet, but it's not. It's hard. It's brutal. And sometimes it looks like nothing at all. You may hate me now, but one day, you'll see I made you who you are. And when that day comes, maybe you'll finally say thank you. Mom, I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply placed the letter into the file I had created, labeled For Records, and moved on with my night. Because now, I finally understood something I hadn't before. Her version of love wasn't love at all. It was control, polished and cold, disguised as tradition and strength. But real love, the kind I had with Liam, was warm. It was presence. It was choosing someone again and again, even when no one else was watching. That weekend, something unexpected happened. I was approached by a local podcast host named Mallory, who ran a series called Breaking the Silence, featuring anonymous stories from women about surviving family trauma, control, and emotional abuse. She'd read my blog. She wanted me to come on. I hesitated. I wasn't sure I was ready to speak out loud what I had only written behind a screen. But after a few days of thinking, I said yes. We recorded the episode in her home studio. Nothing fancy, just 2 chairs, a mic, and a mug of tea she offered with a smile. We talked for nearly an hour. I shared everything. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The story resonated on its own. Mallory thanked me afterward with tears in her eyes. 3 weeks later, the episode aired. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in. Women who said they finally had the words for what they had gone through. Daughters who said they felt seen for the first time. A woman from Dallas wrote, "You spoke the truth I've never been able to admit, even to myself." And that's when it hit me. My story wasn't just about surviving my mother. It was about reclaiming my identity. It was about letting go of the lies that kept me small. It was about refusing to pass that pain down to Liam. And in doing so, I had created a space for others to do the same. I never responded to my mother's letter. I never reached out again. But I did do one last thing. I mailed her a package, no note, no explanation. Just a CD recording of my podcast episode. I never heard back. But somehow I knew she'd listen. And that was enough. It was a Sunday in late May when everything came to a head. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and weighs down your thoughts. I had just finished watering the plants on our small balcony when my phone buzzed. It wasn't a message or a missed call. It was a calendar reminder. One I had forgotten existed. Mom's annual garden gala, 3 p.m., Fair Lake Country Club. I stared at it for a moment, almost amused. It used to be one of the most important events on her calendar, and, by extension, mine. A display of manicured perfection, with hors d'oeuvres in geometric arrangements, champagne towers, and enough floral installations to rival a royal wedding. The whole event was designed to showcase my mother's version of a fairy tale. The benevolent matriarch, the devoted daughter, the angelic grandson. This year, I wasn't on the guest list, but I would be there. Not as a guest, not as her accessory, as a truth she could no longer hide. I hadn't planned it. It wasn't some grand scheme I had been sitting on. But when I saw that notification, something inside me solidified. For months, I had been sharing my voice, my truth, with strangers across a screen. But the one person who had shaped that truth more than anyone else still hadn't faced it directly. She had tried to erase me from her life, from Liam's life, while continuing to play the saint to her circle of admirers. She thought her silence had won, that if she ignored me long enough, the damage would fade. But the damage had a voice now. I picked out a simple navy dress. Nothing fancy, but clean and respectful. I dressed Liam in a button-up and khakis. He didn't ask questions, just smiled when I told him we were going for a drive and might see some people he recognized. I packed a manila envelope in my bag. Inside was everything I had ever wanted to say. When we arrived at the country club, the valet gave me a confused look but took my keys anyway. Guests were already arriving, dressed in pastel suits and floral dresses, mingling in small clusters under white canopies. The garden was breathtaking, I had to admit. Orchids hanging from crystal frames, a live quartet playing near the fountain, even a small petting zoo tucked behind a row of hedges. All for show, all curated, all fake. I held Liam's hand tightly as we stepped onto the lawn. Heads turned, whispers sparked. I spotted several women from her social group stiffen when they saw me. No one approached. No one knew what to do with the ghost of a daughter come back to life. And then I saw her. She stood near the center of the crowd, dressed in a pale pink gown that shimmered under the sunlight. Her hair was immaculate, her smile effortless. She was holding a glass of champagne and laughing at something a man beside her had said, until her eyes met mine. For a second, she froze, just a flicker of recognition, like a glitch in the perfect performance. Then she turned back to her guest as if I hadn't existed, as if I were a shadow she had already outrun. But I didn't move. I walked directly toward her, Liam beside me. "Hello, Mother," I said, calmly, clearly. The people around her stopped talking. A few stepped back. Others stared. Her smile didn't return. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "Natalie," she said, "this is neither the time nor the place." "On the contrary," I said, "it's the perfect place. After all, this is where you built your story." I figured it was only fair I shared mine. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. "I brought you something. It's not a gift. It's not revenge. It's the truth. The version you never let anyone see." Her hand twitched, but she didn't take it. "Inside," I continued, "you'll find every message you ever sent me. Every word you used to shame me, belittle me, erase me. There's also a transcript of your voicemail, and a copy of the CPS case you filed against me. It was closed, by the way. No findings. But you already knew that, didn't you?" Her face had turned pale, not out of embarrassment, but fury. Controlled, bubbling fury. "You think this makes you look strong?" she whispered. "Dragging your child into this circus? Making a scene in front of my guests?" I looked around at the faces watching us. No one laughed. No one spoke. "I didn't drag my child anywhere," I said. "I'm showing him what it looks like to stand up to cruelty, to say, 'Enough. I'm not here to fight you. I'm not here to ruin your party. I'm here to stop pretending.'" I placed the envelope on the small cocktail table beside her. Then I turned to Liam. "Say goodbye to your grandmother," I said softly. He looked up at her, confused. Then, after a long moment, he waved. "Bye." I took his hand, and we walked away. Not a single person stopped us. When we reached the car, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Liam asked if we were going to get ice cream, and I laughed. "You know what? I think we are." We drove to our favorite place, a tiny shop on South Lamar that served wild flavors like lavender honey and cinnamon crunch. We sat on a bench outside, the sun warm on our faces, and shared 2 scoops between us. Later that evening, I received an email. No subject, no salutation, just one line. "You've made your choice. Don't expect forgiveness." I didn't respond, because I hadn't asked for forgiveness. I had chosen freedom. That night, after Liam went to bed, I opened my laptop and wrote a new blog post. It wasn't about her. It wasn't about the past. It was about the future. About the moment I realized that I didn't need to fix her in order to be whole, that I didn't have to win her love to be worthy of love, that I could raise a child without repeating the cycle. I wrote about the garden, the silence, the truth, and for the first time I didn't feel like a victim writing a memoir. I felt like a woman writing a declaration. In the weeks after the garden party, something in me began to settle. Not in the way things settle when you give up, but in the way a storm calms after its final thunderclap. I didn't hear from my mother again. No calls, no letters, no messengers sent through mutual acquaintances trying to mend the bridge she herself had burned to the ground. She had withdrawn entirely, perhaps waiting for the dust to clear so she could begin rewriting the story in her favor, as she had always done. But this time, there was no rewriting. Too many people had seen. Too many people had heard. And more importantly, I no longer cared. The world didn't stop spinning. Bills still came in the mail. Liam still had reading assignments and spelling quizzes. The dishes still needed doing and laundry still piled up in the basket, but everything felt lighter, easier. There was no longer a constant undercurrent of dread humming in the background. I could breathe. I could think without second-guessing myself. I could finally move forward, and Liam flourished. Without the weight of the charade, his energy returned with a vengeance. He made new friends at school, joined a little weekend soccer club, and developed a newfound obsession with building elaborate cardboard forts in our living room. Every day brought a new drawing, a new joke, a new dance move I was forced to replicate under threat of tickles. I saw the joy in his eyes that I had feared might never return after the hospital, and with every laugh, every hug, every moment where he ran to me and wrapped his arms around my waist, I felt that I had made the right decision. Not just for me, but for him. I thought often about cycles, how so many daughters became their mothers without even realizing it, how generational pain passed down like an heirloom, unwrapped and accepted with each new birth. My mother had been shaped by someone too, I knew. Someone who had taught her to equate love with control, praise with performance. Maybe she had once been a girl like me, maybe not, but somewhere along the way, she had made the choice to continue the cycle. I had chosen to break it. My therapist, Ellen, often reminded me that healing isn't linear, that grief can exist even when the person you're grieving is still alive. And it was true. There were days when I missed her, not the real her, but the idea of her, the mother I used to dream of, the one I imagined might one day show up on my doorstep with tearful eyes and open arms. That mother never existed, but sometimes my heart still ached for her. One night, after Liam had fallen asleep in his blanket fort, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea and scrolled through old photos on my phone. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, even a few rare snapshots of my mother holding Liam when he was small. She looked beautiful in them, perfectly posed, her smile polished. No one would guess what had happened before or after the shutter clicked. But I knew. I remembered every sharp word, every passive-aggressive comment, every time she made me feel like less in my own home. I selected a photo of just Liam, one of my favorites. He was laughing, holding a popsicle, his cheeks sticky and his eyes bright with sunlight. I uploaded it to the blog and wrote a new post. "This is my why," I typed. "This is the reason I told the truth, stood my ground, and walked away. Not because I wanted to hurt her, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to protect this smile. I wanted to protect the light in his eyes, and in doing so, I found my own light again." The post went viral. Thousands of shares, tens of thousands of comments. Messages poured in from mothers, daughters, survivors. Some had never spoken about their pain until now. Others had been estranged from family members for years and felt seen for the first time. I was invited to speak on another podcast. Then a digital magazine reached out asking if I would write a personal essay. I hesitated at first, nervous about exposure, but eventually I said yes, and the world kept opening. One afternoon, I received a letter from someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. My father. He had left when I was 17, long before Liam, long before the version of me that stood tall today. His departure had always been a mystery to me, something my mother refused to discuss. In her words, he was a coward, a failure, a man who couldn't handle a strong woman. But his letter told a different story. "Natalie," it began, "I read your blog. I cried. Not just because of what you've endured, but because of how brave you've become. I left because I was afraid of her too. I let that fear keep me away from you, and that is a regret I will carry forever. But seeing the woman you've become, it gives me hope. If you ever want to talk, I'd like the chance to know you again." I cried, long and hard, not out of sadness, but out of something close to release. I wasn't sure what the future held with him, but I felt the smallest door open, a new possibility, one that wasn't forged in pain, but in understanding. Months passed. The blog became a platform for others. I invited guest writers, created a section for anonymous stories, and even started a mentorship group for young women struggling with toxic family dynamics. I wasn't a therapist, I wasn't a professional, but I was someone who had lived through it, and sometimes That was enough. Liam's 8th birthday was simple. Just a few close friends, a small cake, and a water balloon fight in the backyard of a neighbor who had become like family. There were no decorations themed by Pinterest, no photographers, no forced smiles, just joy. Real, unfiltered joy. And when I looked at him, soaked and laughing, chasing his friend with a half-filled balloon, I felt something deep in my chest. Peace. I had come so far from the woman who once stood silent at the end of her mother's demands. I had grown, bled, healed, and rebuilt. And while the road had been painful, I wouldn't change a thing. Because now I knew what it meant to choose myself. And even more, I knew what it meant to be the mother I never had. It's been 3 years since that spring when everything fell apart. And then, somehow, came together. Liam is 10 now. He's taller than most boys in his class, with a mop of chestnut curls that refuses to be tamed and a confidence that glows from within. Sometimes when he speaks, I forget how young he still is. He asks questions that pull me into deep thought. Why do some people act like they love you but don't? Or, if someone's mean to you all the time, does that mean they're hurting inside too? His curiosity isn't just about the world. It's about the people in it. And I can see it. He's watching, learning, absorbing every choice I make like sunlight on his skin. We live in a new apartment now. It's still in Austin, not too far from where we were before, but it feels different, brighter. There are more windows, more air. It's not big, but every corner feels like home. The walls are covered in Liam's art, dragons, planets, comic book heroes, and there are books stacked everywhere. My novels, his chapter books, and the ones we read together before bed. We have a ritual now. Every night, no matter how tired I am, I sit beside him and we read. Sometimes he picks a fantasy story. Other nights, something funny. But the last thing he hears every night is the sound of my voice saying, "I love you. I'm proud of you. You're safe." He doesn't ask about my mother anymore. He stopped mentioning her around the time he turned 9. I think the last piece of hope he held on to dissolved sometime after she missed another birthday, another school event, another moment that could have mattered but didn't. Children may be innocent, but they're not blind. And even without words, they know when someone doesn't show up. They feel the spaces where love is supposed to be. He never said, "I don't want to see her," but he didn't have to. The silence between us said enough. Still, sometimes I wonder if she thinks of him, if she regrets, if she scrolls through photos from those curated parties and realizes how little they meant. I don't know. And honestly, I don't need to. The story we're writing now doesn't include her. The blog still lives, though I don't post as often. It's become more than just a chronicle of pain. It's a space of growth, of reflection, of hope. I renamed it last year. It used to be Unspoken Daughter. Now it's called Rooted Light, because that's what this journey has been. Growing roots in the darkness and finding light despite it. Other women write there now. We have contributors from all over. Single moms, daughters estranged from their families, even a few adult sons who grew up under the shadow of perfection. They share their stories bravely, and I do my best to honor them. We host monthly virtual circles. We laugh. We cry. We support. The community we've built is quiet, but powerful. A garden grown from ash. I sometimes receive letters from readers who've just discovered our space. They always start the same way. "I thought I was alone." And every time I respond, I say this: "You were never alone. You just hadn't found us yet." Liam knows about the blog now. Not every detail, of course, but he understands the basics. That his mom once lived in a house where love had conditions. That she made a choice to break away. That she chose him. And that she chose herself. I showed him a post once, one that didn't mention names or places. He read it carefully, then looked at me and said, "I think you're brave." I smiled. "You make me brave," I told him. That's the truth. He's the reason I spoke up. The reason I stood tall when I wanted to collapse. The reason I kept going when fear clawed at my chest. Because one day, he'll become a man. And I want him to remember the kind of woman who raised him. Not because I was perfect, but because I was honest. Because I loved him more than I feared my past. There was a moment recently that brought everything full circle. It happened at his school. I'd been invited to speak at a career day event. Nothing fancy, just a few parents talking about their jobs. But when it was my turn, I paused. I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a doctor. I didn't have a title that commanded respect in traditional ways. So I stood in front of a classroom of 10-year-olds and said this: I'm a storyteller. I tell stories that help people feel seen. I write about things that are hard to say out loud, and I help others do the same. One little girl raised her hand. Do your stories make people cry? Sometimes, I said, but they also help people heal. Liam beamed at me from the second row, his chin resting on his fists. Afterwards, his teacher pulled me aside. He talks about you all the time, she said. He says you're his hero. I drove home that day with the windows down, the wind in my hair, and a calmness in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Because this is what healing looks like. It's not loud. It's not always cinematic. It's not a grand declaration in front of a crowd. Sometimes it's quiet, soft. It's showing up. It's telling the truth. It's saying no when the world expects yes. It's choosing peace over legacy, love over loyalty to pain, light over illusion. I still don't know what became of my mother. She's still in Austin, I think. Still in her circle. Still performing. I hear about her through the grapevine occasionally, usually through someone who once knew me better than they knew her. I don't flinch when I hear her name anymore. I don't brace. I just let it pass. Because the woman I used to be, the one who lived for her approval, is gone. And in her place stands someone new. Someone who knows that silence can be broken, that love can be reclaimed, that a woman's worth is not determined by how well she plays someone else's role, but by how bravely she writes her own. My name is Natalie Brooks, and this is my story. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who was supposed to love you just to protect your child and yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If my story touched something in you, please like and subscribe to hear more real journeys of healing, boundaries, and courage. And maybe send this video to someone who's silently struggling with a toxic family bond. They might need to hear they're not alone. Remember, choosing peace over approval isn't selfish. It's survival. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that healing begins the moment you stop asking for permission to protect your light.